Well, when I started this channel, I'm not sure if I had this exactly clear in my head, but I pretty much do have it clear in my head now. The purpose of this channel and what my intentions are, what it is intended for, is to inform people of things, to pass information freely to people. Maybe not even to tell people things directly, but to give them maybe even not information they already know, but concepts in a slightly different way. To maybe, like, any artist, I'm not calling myself an artist, could paint a painting that represents the same thing, but they do it with their own colors, their own style, their own aesthetic. The same way as if you would write a book or a poem, or carve a statue or do whatever. Lots of people, even if it's a machine that has a function to do something, lots of people can find many different ways of doing it. There are many ways of skinning a cat, sure, lots of different solutions to engineering problems. And maybe there's a best one, but it depends on which aspects of the solution you want to prioritize. I mean, if it's just a machine to do something, you might want to prioritize based on what raw materials you have available to you, how much it costs to build it, how reliable it's going to be, what's the cost of ownership, and many other things like that. Anyway, I did intend to talk for a little bit. I think preambles are good because, I think a lot of people now, we know that there are certain things that happen, certain ways of analyzing certain videos or audios, and perhaps it sort of listens for a little bit and then says, right, that's all right, I'll let that carry on. Okay. Let me introduce the word serendipity. Now, I haven't looked up the definition, but I'll define it this way: a beautifully time appropriate confluence of events. And that may not get exactly to it, but I was trying to think of something that is a little bit poetic. Confluence means that things flow together. So we often think of time as in flows of time. The time flows towards a certain point, and a river flows towards a certain point. Was the path that it took predetermined? Maybe it could have chosen to go left or right at any particular stage of the light. Maybe it was a function of the terrain. Maybe no matter what it did, it was always going to end up roughly at the same place anyway. Even if not exactly at the same river mouth, it was always going to end up at the sea. So does that mean, is that if I use that metaphor for somebody's life, does that mean that our lives are predetermined, predestined? Or does it mean that we have free will to alter the course of our lives, but ultimately we all end up in the same place? It's a confusing thing. It's all about fatalism versus free will. And like so many things, the answer isn't so simple once you really start looking into it. And maybe the best answer is nobody really knows, but here's my best guess. There was a movie, I think, called Serendipity, and it was about a guy who met a girl, and she was, I suppose, charmingly kooky, charmingly unconventional. And I think maybe the plot line was that they both really liked each other, but she said, no, I believe in fate so much that if we're meant to be together, well, then fate, the universe, God, or whatever, but maybe they didn't say God. It was more secular than that. So the universe will have a way of flowing both of our destinies together if it's really meant to be. There's some reason to maybe, there would be maybe perhaps like some poetic license at the very least to believe that these things may be true. But my advice to anybody out there who may be thinking along those lines, and if you're in your teens or your 20s, or at any age, 30s or whatever, I would counterbalance that very strongly with the idea of seizing the day. Even though this Carpe Diem thing, since the time of the Dead Poets Society movie with Robin Williams and all the rest of the guys in it, I suppose through familiarity, that has started to sound like an extremely worn out cliche. Nonetheless, everything in life seems to be a balance between these two things: fate or destiny, or I shouldn't say fate or destiny, they're the same thing, or free will. And with this girl, she took it to extremes. What she should have said is, fate has already happened. It's brought you to me, and I'm not going to waste this opportunity. So don't waste your opportunities in a lot of things. I'm not, people might translate that towards business opportunities. Maybe so. I'm speaking more in the sense of when it comes to meeting somebody who you think, especially early on in your life, you may be able to flow together as combined streams. I may be stretching this metaphor a bit, but in any case, there comes a point in your life, or maybe it's not an exact point, but gradually as you get older, you start thinking that you do genuinely only regret the decisions that you didn't take. And the reason usually you didn't take decisions, especially when it comes to asking somebody that you are attracted to spend some time with you, is because you're terrified of rejection. And that's always the wrong reason to turn around and walk away. Never ever do that. But she thought she was going to be sort of charmingly unconventional and just say, I'm going to write my number in a book and I'm going to put this book in this bookstore, and then we have to walk away, and then you come back. Or no, you don't come back, but he did, but the book was sold. And so he went around looking for copies of this book to see if he could get her number. Anyway, that's enough of an introduction, but it's talking about serendipity. Now, as I got older, things seeming to happen for a reason. Well, maybe they did a lot and more in my life. People came in and out of my life. It almost seemed like because I needed to tell them something, or they needed to teach me something. And usually they didn't even understand that they were teaching me something. It was just, I mean, of course, they were human beings with their own agency and their own life stories, but what you will find is a lot of the times people express something in a way they hadn't even intended to be meaningful to you, in a way that suddenly unlocks a meaning of something that you already knew, but you hadn't looked at it in a certain way. And therefore, you really didn't understand it in any more than a sort of, if it's like a sound, you had it in a monaural understanding. And then that opened up a stereo, which in Greek means solid, a stereo understanding of it if it was a sound. I often mix my metaphors. And maybe even as you grow older, you start to get a Dolby 5.1 theatre surround sound understanding of things. But we must never be too proud of our understanding. I'll get on a little bit later, to reiterate how we should never, ever say, now I know everything, and be proud about how much we know. That's how religions get started, and you think you can be a figurehead of a religion, and it's no longer about the truth and understanding. It's more about your own self-aggrandizement, your own building monuments to, how proud you are about your own intellect. And that's how, let's personify him as the devil. That's how he gets into you, through your own stupid pride in thinking that you're intelligent. I'll say this, even though I may have said it before. Human beings thinking that they're clever is like crocodiles thinking that they're beautiful. And, IQ bragging is, amongst human beings about, how much more IQ somebody has than another. It's as ridiculous as crocodiles holding a beauty pageant and saying, oh, wow, one crocodile is so much more beautiful than the rest. We will have to crown that as, Miss Crocodile 2021. It's that ridiculous. So we really, the more that we think that we understand and that we discover. I'll quote this fellow now, but you'll understand the context, or I'll explain the context a little bit later. I might as well quote it now, seeing as it came up naturally. He said, at first, when you start to either be told these things or things are revealed to you, or in his case, when you are allowed to have access to certain information, he said, the reaction will be amazement that all this information existed. And you'll feel like a fool that you didn't know about it before, even though you knew the top secret material existed. But after a little while, you get used to it. And you'll find that you'll be speaking to people and saying, what would they be telling me if they knew what I knew? And then, by the way, he went on to say, which, by the way, didn't have to be true or false. It was just highly secret. So, just because you read some, highly classified document that's been released doesn't mean that it's true. Even if it says verified on it. By whom? And did they understand themselves that they didn't know it to be true, that they were just told that it was true, and so on and so on. Anyway, here's the serendipity. I found this video, and I'll leave links to all these videos in the description of this video. So a lot of people think, let me introduce this guy by saying this. A lot of people think that a lot of people that they see on YouTube who pretty much specialize in what might be in another time, like say in the 1970s or the 1980s, what might be considered to be investigative journalism. And I think this guy that I'm going to tell you about now, he does call what he does investigative journalism. He recently, or just today, in fact, has been removed from you know where tube, and I'll tell you why in a minute he was removed. You won't be very surprised, but what I want to say to you is, a lot of people in inverted commas truther community, and maybe I would have considered, or I consider myself to be a. I can understand and I can see other people who have gone through many years of gradually learning things, and we'll never know it all, really. Just the moment you think you know it all, then every day you learn a new thing and you wonder again, right? I identify with that phrase, even though it's slightly out of context. You wonder how you never knew this before when you learn something. It seems so either so obvious or such a big revelation that you think, how could I have never have heard of this before? Or actually, what I think a lot of us might understand now is, no matter what you find out now, you sort of say to yourself, how did I not sort of just know this by simply figuring it out? I didn't need to be told it. I could have intuited it. I could have inferred it from everything else that I knew, or just from knowing that the way that the world is arranged right now, you can pretty much work backwards and figure out everything, or you can understand what people would have done or did do or would have had to have done if any of the stuff we see around us now is currently happening, and any of the just really boring mainstream normal, let's say, ways that history has been told to us, and what a normal average person's understanding, even as little as it might be these days, of history is. Anybody could in fact work out for themselves independently of anything else, just based on surmisation. In other words, saying, well, if this happened, then reasonably it could be inferred from that this would have had to have happened for that to have occurred, or one of two things would have needed to have happened after that if they took that decision, which they tell us they did. And by corroboration, I could say that the result of having done that is evident, so I can pretty much intuit that yes, indeed, it did happen, and so on and so on. I don't mean to be getting too convoluted. I'm just trying to, give some broad brushstrokes here about how there's no point in thinking that any of us are clever and guess how much I know, and I knew this before this person did, and well, you're telling me this, but did you know this? And because we tend to get into a competition of look how clever we are and look how knowledgeable we are. I mean, it's what we're talking about in a sense is, okay, how quick is my processor speed, and how much memory do I have to retain all this? I mean, at the end of the day, you get to a certain point, like I sort of often say to myself, that after a certain year, in my memory, I will say it was roughly between 2008 and 2012, when the processing power, the storage, maybe not the storage exactly, but the processing power and memory, as in, just the RAM that most computers have to put things that they're running or that you're working on at any given moment into memory while you work on them. And the processor speed to do any manipulation of audio and video and whatever, even though, sure, you can have faster and faster ones, but still, there comes a certain point where, unless you're running the absolute latest video game or whatever it is, sure, you might need a specialized video card. But for most people, going on the internet, watching videos, uploading videos, that kind of thing, writing documents for sure, getting their email, nobody really needed a faster computer than what was made between, say, roughly 2010 and or I was going to say between 2008 and 2012. Really, unless something breaks in such a way that it just becomes unusable, like keys fall off the keyboard or the screen is cracked, or the charger doesn't work or the battery is dead. These are just reasons then to upgrade, in inverted commas, but it just gives people an excuse to buy the latest model. And really, it might just be that they're more attracted to the case than anything else. Anyway, there comes a certain point, I think, in any person's life, and by person I mean a living man or a woman who actually is still living and hasn't subjugated their mind so much that they just have stopped. They've closed off all avenues of investigation, and they've stopped all natural curiosity. They just pretty much metaphorically, figuratively, have their fingers in their ears and, hands over their eyes and whatever is, they've pursed their lips so that it's see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. They don't want to know, they don't want to hear about it, and they just want to keep quiet and just watch whatever it is that keeps them amused and entertained on TV. Because I think everybody, as soulless as so many people appear to be, everybody does understand, they have the capacity for understanding. But I think, as we know, a lot of these people out there who we sometimes wonder, are they actually human beings, or are they organic portals, is a word that I've heard people use for, this phenomenon of people who don't apparently have any inner voice. Or could that be like an inner light, like the light of curiosity, of, a natural knowing inside, where anybody could really know things if they just chose to sit still for long enough to work them out. But I think they shut off the noises in their head, Yeah, I mean, it's likened, I suppose, to, the walking zombies. They're pretty much walking dead. And I have seen so many people where they are walking around as though they have no light behind their eyes, And after a while, I mean, I did get to be able to see whether people still had a natural light behind their eyes. You could tell if they were animated, in other words, Okay, I can't think of the other word for organic portals. But I'm sure if you're listening now, you'll know exactly what I mean. I don't need to tell you all the synonyms for that. Anyway, getting back to this a little bit, I still haven't told you the name of this fellow, and I suppose I'd better. His name is Jason Bermas, and we are long enough into this now where maybe, whatever is listening isn't listening anymore. But who knows? I'm taking a certain amount of risk. Now, although, as I mentioned earlier, the purpose of my channel was not to earn anything for myself, even though I do like when people like what I do or give me some compliments. I know that it shouldn't be about that. I know that it should just be me letting you know things freely. And that's not to say you don't know it already or you couldn't have figured it out for yourself. It's just, I think we people who still have a light behind our eyes, who still have got our souls mostly intact, well, what we can do is we can spark off each other, So it's not that we're necessarily telling things to each other we don't know, but we're keeping ideas alive. And that's like keeping the flame of human animation alive, let's say. So this fellow Jason Bermas, a lot of people think that people like him, investigative journalists, or the modern equivalent of that on YouTube, and people like, say, Brian from High Impact Flicks, people think, no, these people have to be either members of some agency, they must be telling us disinformation, or maybe they're telling us a certain amount of true information so they can mix in lies. Look, everybody now who's in the game, as in the game of life now long enough, who wants to follow the path of truth, you can't even trust the signposts, right? If you're on this metaphorical journey, you're going to have developed your own internal moral compass, and you're going to have to calibrate that by certain principles that you have worked out for yourself and that you hold near and dear through thick and thin. No matter how tough the way gets, no matter how terrible the weather gets, no matter how everything is trying to tell you, go back, don't follow this path. It's a narrow path. You're going to have to be sure of your bearings by having worked them out yourself, and you must be the final arbiter of what goes into your mind and what you keep. And I'll mention the 3 C's. I made a mess of trying to explain it online on a stream before, but that's sometimes because you just forget things under a slight amount of extra pressure. The 3 C's, but I might add to it later. I bet you there's going to be another C I'll add later, but I'll keep it at 3 for now. It's consistency, derived by corroboration or contradiction. So you see what fits together and you see what doesn't. And there's a constant process of that to see then what is consistent. And is everything inside you, in your heart, mind and soul, is everything consistent? In other words, is it made of the same thing? And if there's something that isn't, you must check to see whether everything else you think you know might be wrong and whether that one thing might be actually true, or vice versa. So anyway, I think that there are people like Jason Bermas and Brian Young from High Impact Flicks who are actually doing their best to keep the flame of human intellect alive, right? To help people through. every day, because it's not just, something that you light it once and you leave it alone. It does need constant rejuvenation and tending. So we have to tend to this fire of truth and illumination. And, I know a lot of people will say, oh, that's starting to sound very lucid, as in Lucifer. Look, again, we'll have to leave all that to the side for now, right? And I know people are worried about this sort of stuff, right? Is he telling us the truth just so that he can later betray us? I'm not. And one of the ways that, of course, I would say that if I was lying to you. So how do you know? You're going to have to figure out for yourself. Like other people, like the great Bill Cooper said, every individual, don't believe me, he would say it. And the best people would say this, the best scientists would say, don't believe me just because I tell you. I've given you the tools, the methods to work it out for yourself. You go investigate for yourself. And that's what Brian says as well. Jason says this too. However, Jason Bermas has just been removed from YouTube. And I can explain, I'm willing to explain to you in general why. But I'll leave a link to where you can go on his another site, right? It's a Witter site where he's got a little video showing the reason that got him cut off. And it was simply showing how Forbes magazine did a 1984 job, as in editing history, editing what they had written previously, because it suddenly wasn't convenient that they had written something. They changed their own headline to contradict what they had said earlier, Maybe it's because they thought, oh, we've spoken too soon, or there wasn't, we've run that up the flagpole and people didn't salute it. So we'll quickly run it down the flagpole. We won't even say it was a mistake. We'll just say, no, that flag was never run up the flagpole. Anybody who thinks so must be crazy. So huge amount of gaslighting, as always, in the way that the lying liars and manipulating manipulators deal with us. Now, this has gone on long enough. So let me try and wrap this up now. I'm not saying that this fellow, that you should trust everything he says. And I'm certainly not saying it that because he got kicked off YouTube, that you should trust him, right? Don't make the mistake of thinking that just because somebody, like other people have been kicked off YouTube, that that must mean they're truthful. They don't like them, right? That's an easy trick that the people could play on you, right? Which is basically like a double bluff, right? And at this stage of the game now, people are going to have to start expecting double bluffs, triple bluffs, and quadruple bluffs. And people say, well, isn't a quadruple bluff the same as a double bluff? It amounts to the same thing, but you just take double the amount of twists and turns, and it just gets people more dizzy then. So as you level up, the game gets harder and harder. I wanted to introduce a lot more things, but I've already quoted one thing that this fellow, and his name is Daniel Ellsberg. And he's before my time when he was working. I don't think that I had even started gestating by the time the Vietnam War started. He used to work for the Defense Department, and then he worked for the State Department in the US. And good old Henry, or Heinz, as his friends called him, Kissinger, called him the most dangerous man in America, right? But what did he mean by dangerous? Well, he meant dangerous to Kissinger's own political narrative. And there were certain things he didn't want to give away. Maybe I won't get into it now. I'll just leave a link to the video, which you should watch. It's on Swedish TV. Skavlan is the name of the TV program, which I presume might be the interviewer's surname. The interviewer, I think, isn't great. He gets a good interview out of him, but he interrupts him, I think, to keep him on a sort of a fairly narrow range. And he doesn't seem to like him going off on tangents, but as you know, I do, and they can often be quite useful. He said a lot of good things in it, or not good, interesting, right? Useful to know. He said that, I think he acknowledges in a certain way, as I said before, he talked about, classified information isn't necessarily true or false, right? It's just highly secret. And the people who classify it might not even know that it's secret. Might not even know that it's false or true. Anyway, let's just suppose, and I know a lot of people consider that they might not be true, but it gets into nuclear war and things like that. Look, I think, I don't want to go over the half hour. So again, there's much more that I could say. I might do it to part 2 on this. If enough people watch it and tell me they're interested, because I think it's possible to watch this and maybe not pick up on some, not subtleties exactly, but some directions that you might go, because as with so many things, there are almost an infinite amount of directions you can sort of go off on a tangent on from a single thought. And that's why I find it so difficult to keep my own little dissertations, I'll call it, even though I don't want to sound like I'm being too pompous, on the straight and narrow. So, Kissinger didn't like him, and apparently Nixon didn't either. Although I've kind of come around to thinking that Nixon might not have been too bad of a fellow. He told a couple of lies, but hey, by today's standards, not too bad at all. And what were his intentions and motivations, And again, I think a lot of us now would realize you couldn't just spill the beans about everything to everyone, because most people aren't capable of taking things in and understanding them, let alone dealing with this sort of emotional pain that it would give people. People just don't want to know these things. Most people don't care, don't want to know. And if you did tell these things to people, well, I think they are worried that it would just be mayhem, or that in an ideal scenario, people just would kind of understand, maybe a little bit, shrug their shoulders and go, whatever. How does that give me more beer or get me more women or whatever it is they think they want, Anyway, get me more money, right? Isn't it all? And they never even say, well, if I have all this money and beer and women, what next? People don't really look beyond their noses, and they don't want to. So this fellow Jason Bermas, I better say that he has been doing this for a long time. Yes, he is connected to AJ. He is listed as a producer of the Loose Change series of movies, which Dylan Avery was listed as the writer of. I think he might have also been connected with the series of Zeitgeist, however you want to say it, movies. I'm not 100% on that, but you can check it out. Now that he's off, our tube, look him up. And he's on a site called Rockfin. But I think he's got his own website where you can view his Loose Change and subsequent movies. If you don't know Loose Change, I mean, that's one of the foundational movies. Same with Zeitgeist. No shame if you don't know them. And I tell you what, always worth a revisit, especially sort of 10, 15, or 15, 20 years later at this stage. To again, see how true it is now, and how well did it hold up over the years. And I would say very well. A lot of people, I think now, especially, that's why I mentioned like the truther community, think, oh, well, that's all kindergarten or truther level stuff. We all know that now. But again, careful of thinking, everything. And that's my own advice to myself that I, tell myself. So I'm not trying to admonish anybody else out there. So again, now I'm not saying Daniel Ellsberg is somebody you should like and trust, or that he's a good guy. Nobody's perfectly good or bad, You really have to understand somebody's motivations and intentions before assuming anything about whether you think they might be a good person, in inverted commas, or a bad person. My mother introduced me to the phrase that you can better judge somebody's character, not by their friends, but by the caliber of the enemies they've made. And when my grandmother died, she said she had made some wonderful friends throughout her life, but also some brilliant enemies. So, Kissinger was one of his enemies, Daniel Ellsberg's enemies. But, Daniel Ellsberg went on to say that he made some good friends, but most of his friends, his working friends and people he knew before he was 40, just couldn't hang around with them anymore because he had made so many enemies in the State Department and Defense Department, because he felt that he had some honor, or he's honor bound, or he had some principles he had to abide by, even though it cost him personally. I would say that's a characteristic or a hallmark of a good person. And he said that they just wouldn't hang around with him anymore. They said he was basically political and social poison. So he made some new friends, and he said he made friends with Noam Chomsky. Now, I know that he was a darling of the left, in other words, but the left has changed a lot. I don't think that Chomsky has sort of distanced himself from the current left. And he's an old man now anyway. Maybe he feels like he's actually be better if he would feel like he's made his life's contributions and maybe he should leave it to other people. I don't know, but maybe if you're still alive, you might feel like, hey, even if you're in your 90s, which I assume that he must be, that you might still have an obligation to speak, whatever you believe is the truth. I think that Noam Chomsky, like a lot of people, have said a lot of very interesting, perhaps a lot of true things, but they've given a lot of people, regardless of where you consider yourself to be on any political scale or spectrum, which, by the way, I don't believe in. I don't believe in a political scale or spectrum. I think that every issue should be judged on its own merits. Like, for starters, it always seemed crazy to me that people were so desperate to try and fit themselves into little boxes. Oh, where do I fit on this political compass? Assuming that there is such a thing as a political compass. It's nonsense. Or where does my personality fit in on this, chart of 12 different distinct personalities? And people talk about, what letters describe their personality. People are desperate to fit themselves into boxes so they can see what other boxes now look like that. And therefore, how can I find a group to identify with? The moment you do that, you've just subjugated your own free will, independence, and you've gotten rid of your own autonomous personality. You have now subjugated your personality to the will of the group, and you don't realize what you've become, but you've become certainly susceptible to the kind of dystopian communism that we find ourselves in now. You enable it. The phrase, every drop of water doesn't think that it's responsible for the deluge, but every individual that is like that contributes to the flood of idiots moving in large stampedes right now. Okay, I said I was going to try and wrap it up. I know this is slightly disjointed. It certainly wasn't in a linear path, not in the way that in my mind I was going to tell this story, even though it's not quite a story. It's a lot of different points, like pixels in a picture. I can't paint them all at once. I seem to be painting them gradually. I'm not the single source of truth, right? But I do know that I have no motivation at all, whether it be profit or, well, I mean, of course, yeah, I'll admit I like when people like me, but again, I dislike humanity well enough, right? So that I tell myself, don't be swayed by, sort of sweet words, honeyed words to me, what I must do is try to remain objective and removed from all of these kind of things, whether it be praise or financial reward or anything else. That my objective must be that if I'm here for now, then I might regret later not having used whatever voice that I might have, whatever small intellect I have, whatever little insights that I might have. I must not stay silent. Otherwise, if I think that I'm better than all these other people, NPCs is the word I think I was looking for earlier. If I think that I'm better than these people, if I'm suggesting that I have a light behind my eyes, then what good is it if I don't at least try to use it? And if I haven't at least tried to use it for, in inverted commas, some good, I do believe that I'm trying to do good. I do think that information should be free and spread as widely and given as freely as possible. I believe in the democratization of information. What we do about people who don't want to hear, that's for another time. It's basically you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I won't force anybody to know or understand anything. I think that might transgress a certain rule of the universe, but I will share anything I have freely, and I think that's the way it should be. Now, I think that's pretty much where I'll leave it. I'll leave some links, and thank you for listening.